Welcome to the Curiosity Crisis. We challenge ourselves to explore the world of business, tech, investing, and science. Get curious and be part of our journey as we discuss, challenge, and learn. So, Kush, what's been keeping you curious?
Mate, what's actually been keeping me curious is technology adoption S curve. So I read a report today about basically the IEA, so International Energy Agency, and other big bodies that have modeled battery uptake incorrectly because every year they've sort of modeled it as a linear growth, and then every year it just gets steeper to more like an exponential curve, which feeds into the whole S curve idea of technology
Mm.
adoption. So, in this report, they basically said, I think it was by RMI, I think they basically said that, the modeling's been wrong because it is one of those transformative technologies that's hitting scale. And the scale is coming from it trickling from industries like electronics into light vehicle transport, into slightly heavier vehicle transport, into like big truck batteries and shipping and stuff like that, and aviation. So
Mm.
the use and stationary storage. So it's only growing. So then that spurs the adoption quicker, and there's more investment going in, so that the price falls and the energy density gets better. And you've talked about stationary batteries and stuff before, so it's just
Mm.
understanding that and how we're modeling things wrong. But it's very, very, very hard to model something as an exponential curve when you don't have the
Yeah.
proof yet.
Well, you don't
So
know when it
anyway,
hits the one, so
yeah,
you're
exactly.
essentially guessing. Yeah, that's good. I like that. Nice.
What are you curious about?
I've always been skeptical of supplements. I've never been one to
Yeah.
really get into it, but
Yep.
I recently bought zinc, magnesium, and vitamin D, and because I've heard some things, some people have said some things to me, and
Mm.
I'm still skeptical. I don't know whether it's going to help me that much or whether it'll even be
Yep.
noticeable or placebo. But I'm
Yep.
interested to try and see what happens. I'm going to do it for like at least a month,
Yep.
and I mean, well, hopefully nothing gets worse. So I'm hoping that yeah, I'll just maybe sleep better or be, I don't know, more not as sore muscular wise. I don't know what the effects will be, but we'll see.
I'm keen to hear how you administer it and actually take it, and then keen to check in a month and see how you've gone.
Yeah, I'll give an update in a few weeks, and we'll see what the go is.
Awesome.
So today we're talking about big industry and big decarbonisation. We've talked a lot about decarbonisation before. We talked about the Tesla master plan, but today we're getting into some of the more of the nitty gritty around things like big industry. So we're referring to mining especially. So today we're looking at FFI as a bit of a case study. Specifically, if you don't know what it is, Fortescue Metals Group, a mining company in Australia, they're the fourth biggest iron ore provider in the world. And they have now a company running in parallel, which is FFI, which is Fortescue Future Industries. And essentially their mining business funds their future industries business. And it's looking at a lot of things, but their overall kind of philosophy is around sustainability and decarbonisation. And so they have that business, but in the future, they're trying to make FFI, a really profitable business as well. So even though it's currently getting funded by FMG, the end goal is that this decarbonisation stuff actually is profitable as well. So yeah, we're getting into that, and we'll look at it as a case study and see how it kind of plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. Very keen to do that.
So I mean, if we just start with some of the targets that they're looking at, it's pretty crazy to think that one of kind of the dirtiest industries has some of these wild targets. So I'll just rattle off a couple of them. So real zero scope 1 and 2 mining ops in the Pilbara. So what that is referring to is their own operations down to net zero. By 2030, enable a reduction in emissions intensity from steel making by Fortescue's customers of 7.5% from financial year 2021 levels. By 2030, enable the reduction in emissions intensity levels from the shipping of our iron ore by 50% from 2021 levels, and US $6.2 billion investment into decarbonisation profitability. And that is referring to FFI.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that's basically net zero real zero, sorry, yeah, for all of their operations in the Pilbara. That's how we say it in WA. But and then helping scope 3 emissions reduce. So it's pretty big industry stuff, and I think it's pretty much probably the most aggressive in the world for a company that does emit quite a lot, just like
Mm.
any mining company would.
And just to clarify, Pilbara or Pilbara, depending on how you say it, it's a region. It's a region in Australia and Western Australia, and that's where a lot of the mining operations of Fortescue as a company happens.
Yep.
So just for clarity, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So some of the other ones, decarbonising iron ore operations by 2030, so real zero. So we talked about that. So that's their, a zero target for their own iron ore operations, which is crazy to think about with all the machinery and all of the logistics and so much that goes into, enormous mining companies. And a lot of that comes down to eliminating diesel from the fleet as well, which is huge. And we'll talk a fair bit about that. And yeah, they have a lot of things to try and do this. They have patents. They have a lot of really interesting innovations, which we'll kind of get into. So I might pass this back to you, Kush, and we can chat about some of those.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we talked a lot about decarbonising heavy industry being one of the hard problems. So, heavy industry and shipping and things like that, all the processes that sort of go into making the materials that we build our world out of are a massive portion of our emissions. So probably north of a third of the world's emissions, and we've talked about that in other episodes, so we can pull the numbers out of there. But basically, what we want to discuss is how this company is doing that by putting investment into decarbonising its own big, heavy industry emissions, and then how that can be shared out with the world.
I think something that is important to remember here is that you lose out a bit with economies of scale for some of these things. So one example is you look at shipping. There's not that many of these shipping vessels, right? But they're enormous. So one, it's a difficult problem to solve, but then it's, you don't get the same economy of scale where it's like you don't really get a trial run. You don't get the first one to do, and then you see how it goes, and then the next iteration is better. It's not like, EVs, for example. You have less sales, I guess, but bigger sales, which is actually more risk.
Exactly, way less units. So getting it right is absolutely important. So I might jump into, I suppose, the game plan for Fortescue. So it's sort of split out into two things. As Fortescue Metals Group, FMG, the first, I suppose, demonstration of FFI's success is decarbonising all of FMG's, the mining company's operations, and then FFI, with all of the innovations that come out of doing that, are planning to expand into new industries, basically clean industries that help enable the world to decarbonise their own operations in heavy industry. So the game plan is, I suppose, in 2022 it started for what was reported this year, and that was basically Pilbara Energy Region going on a solar gas hybrid, so basically powering it as renewable as possible. And then now they're targeting by 2025 zero emission battery or hydrogen trucks. So basically those massive, they're called Moxies in mining, but massive mining trucks moving around all of their operations that are traditionally powered by diesel will be replaced by zero emission trucks. So it's a huge reduction there. And then battery or ammonia engine trains, and that includes the Infinity train, which we'll talk about in as part of their innovations with with the former Williams F1 team that they bought out, and then upgrading their plant capacity as part of their mining operation expansion in 2027, which then again obviously be powered renewably and with batteries wherever possible. And then the stretch target for 2029 is have all electric or hydrogen powered drill rigs and excavators. So again, the heavy machinery going into running a mine site. So that's how they're going to decarbonize their own emissions by 2030.
Let's have maybe a bit of a better look at what is WAE Projects and how did that kind of come about?
Yeah, so WAE is Williams Advanced Engineering. They're the team that is behind the Williams F1 team. So now it's called Fortescue WAE, which is basically Fortescue buying the Williams Advanced Engineering team, because obviously that team is more like an engineering specialist house. So not just F1, although they've got specialists in that, but they brought in-house the innovation arm that's going to deliver their electric mining trucks, the electric, the Infinity train, and the electric drill rigs, and basically heavy mining equipment. So yeah, have just brought them in-house and are developing all those solutions hand in hand.
And a lot of this is to reduce the amount of diesel consumption Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously they've identified that most or a lot of their emissions from mine site operations comes from burning diesel to power all the heavy equipment that needs to
Mm.
happen to pull iron ore out of the ground. So yeah, that's the whole point.
And I believe I heard an estimated figure of it would be about 600 million per year would be saved from if diesel consumption went to zero.
From their mine
Just
sites?
from their mine sites, which would be
Right.
a lot.
It's a hell of a lot, and I think I don't know that number off the back of it. But if you think about decarbonising transportation, the main thing is eliminating diesel from all things like big trucks, big ships,
Yeah.
planes. Well, not diesel, but jet fuel. So that's a massive problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what are some of the other highlight projects outside of kind of decarbonising their own industry and equipment?
Yeah, so two of the things are, well, they're still, I suppose, decarbonising transportation, but one of them I'll talk briefly about the Infinity train and, well, basically the train. So if they decarbonise that with the Infinity train, and I believe the concept, and I don't know if it's changed in the last couple of months, but since I've read up on it, but the Infinity train concept is basically they've got these trains that go from mine site to port and back, right? And they're there to haul a hell of a lot of iron ore. So the Infinity train concept, I believe, is for the train to leave the mine site, go downhill to the port, obviously at sea level, and during that they use the energy saved and regenerated to charge the batteries, then drop all the iron ore, and then it goes back uphill, empty cargo, so obviously much lighter and needs less energy because of that, and goes uphill on the battery that's been regenerated from the downhill. So that's the Infinity train, obviously sort of self-sufficient, might require some charging, which ideally would come from renewables, but that's that. And then the other one is using green ammonia to power the locomotive. So basically still run it through an engine, but the ammonia is produced renewably, with hydrogen. So that's one. And then the other is the shipping. So I know you know a little bit about shipping, but basically changing the engines to run either if it's short haul on batteries, but then otherwise on ammonia again.
Yeah. And I believe there's a lot of wasted energy in that slowing down the train, because you have, it's full of tons and tons and tons of mined, iron ore or whatever. But there's so much of the diesel consumption that it uses is actually to slow itself down, which is crazy because you can then store that same energy with regenerative braking, and now it can get itself back as well without any additional energy. So I think that's going to be really significant in terms of the operations as well.
And I suppose why it's significant, I think you asked that question right at the start of it. It's like, these guys, this is big heavy industry, it's hard to decarbonise. It's been run and perfected so far to be as efficient as possible, but obviously it emits a lot. If they do this, get it right, and prove that it works, then, you take that case study and apply it to other mines around the world with similar geographies, downhill to the port, uphill back. It could work. Obviously, like you said, the economies of scale aren't that easy. They're massive, massive investments in a train or a ship. But you demonstrate it once, you get it to work, then because they have this in-house team that's developing these solutions, I think ideally the end game, and I don't know, but you could probably read it from the reports and what they're telling their shareholders, is that, eventually they can help or sell this technology to their potentially competitors or peers in the industry. So turning that business something profitable.
Yeah, I think that's something that's actually quite important, is that there's a lot of advantage to them doing it in-house, because there's not much business incentive to try and solve the problem for someone else and to sell it with a profit versus building it for yourself and saving yourself any costs in future and then being able to sell it as well. So they kind of get to double dip on profitability on any of the innovations. Whereas if you were to, for example, like a startup to try and solve the same issues, one, you don't have exposure or the industry, not necessarily experience, but you don't have the environment to be able to test things in the same way that they do. But then additionally, you take on enormous risk because it doesn't help you directly. Whereas if they solve anything, even to a small extent, it ends up helping them directly. Whereas then you have to find a sale afterwards. So I think that's a really big thing, is that they're actually in a very unique position to be able to spend all this capital on all of this, basically R&D.
Absolutely, I can completely agree with you, and I'll just build on it with 2 points. It's like you said, with a startup. So say Williams Advanced Engineering did this on their own, or like a much smaller company did this on their own. It's very hard to find the capital to do that if you don't have the demand there ready to go. So unless there was hundreds of orders piling up for these infinity trains or green ammonia locomotives, then how do you how can you fund it, or get investment to fund it? So I suppose in that sense, Fortescue's creating their own demand, and that's come from their targets and maybe their board and shareholders and whatever, that they want this decarbonised mining operation. So that's the demand, and then they bring the innovation in-house, and they can, you've got that perfect environment to test it. So yeah, I suppose on the other side as well of your point on they double dip on the profitability, yes, they make the savings, and yes, then eventually they'll be able to potentially sell it out. But the other side of that is they are bearing the cost, but they've accepted that they're going to bear the cost to get the first reward, be the first mover in the space, which is it's a very big step because they got the capital to do it. So they've sort of said, why not, which is huge.
And I'll just say one other thing, and that is that they have one other kind of unique position, which is that their major shareholder is one person.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's really significant because they don't have to convince the board to pivot their strategy to accommodate something that will be a problem in 10 years' time, where they say, well, what happens if regulation says we have to meet this or whatever? Whereas most boards would probably just say, well, we're making billions right now, so we'll just swallow it, and then we'll deal with that down the line. So they don't need to convince the board because it's one person. So, Andrew Forrest can say, well, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to be prepared so that in 10 years' time, when this stuff does matter a lot, we're already prepared for it. So I think that's one of the other things, is even if it's from an industry perspective, it actually makes a lot of sense for them to do this. A lot of their competitors might not be in the same position to be able to do it.
Yeah, well, 100%. I think this is a very unique set of circumstances that allows the company to be able to do that. Another company, I don't know what the shareholding base of like a Rio or Tinto or a BHP is like, but it might be a lot more diversified than, Andrew or Twiggy Forrest owning most of the company. And, there's no secret that he's been out at every public forum, the World Economic Forum, COP28, all that sort of stuff, talking, very openly about doing this and challenging other companies and governments to do the same. So he's trying to put the step forward, which is obviously risky, but because he's got billions and he prioritizes this, that's why it's sort of happening.
Yeah. So do you want to kind of step us through the game plan of what they're going to go try and tackle first and then move on to after that?
Yeah, so I sort of went through the year by years, but I think the first cab off the ranks for Williams Advanced Engineering and trying to get to commerciality is the zero emission trucks. So they've got the Roadrunner currently. So they've got a couple of, I suppose, demonstration projects, which again, like you said, not a lot of economies of scale because there are less units essentially, but they've got an electric truck called Roadrunner operating on some of its mine sites, and they're testing it at the moment, which is pretty big. They've got I think it's called the Green Pioneer. I think it controversially or famously sailed to COP28. I think there's something around that. I didn't read into it too much, but basically that's an ammonia powered ship, so dual fuel powered, which they've done, which is a couple of demonstration projects. So the thing is, obviously these are hard solutions to get to, and you don't get too many economies of scale by doing one. But the big progress is them actually having them out and operating around the world.
Yeah, totally. So we've talked about kind of moving the operations of the current mining situation, getting all of that decarbonized. What about other solutions? Like what about hydrogen? FFI have mentioned it before. What's kind of going on there?
Yeah, so I mean, like in their last reporting, there's a couple of big milestones that they told the world about. They've reached the final investment decision on a Phoenix hydrogen hub in Arizona, a Gladstone in Australia electrolyzer factory. So that's one of the key technologies to be able to produce green hydrogen. Essentially, it's splitting water to get hydrogen out of it, and then using renewable energy to do that, hence the green. And then I've also a green iron commercial trial plant in at Christmas Creek in WA. So basically that's using hydrogen to produce green iron, which is one step further than most iron ore companies currently do at the moment. So at the moment, the iron ore, or like basically steel making, is you get iron ore, which is straight from the ground, then you turn it into iron, and then it gets processed into steel. And across that, there's a lot of emissions in sort of that life cycle, but they're using that hydrogen to turn it into green iron, which is like a further processed and then exportable product. And then they're also getting in, with the electrolyzers, more into the upstream green hydrogen production game, because then they'll be able to potentially sell their electrolyzers to other people that want to make hydrogen or green hydrogen to do things like, produce ammonia or produce green iron and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense for them because they can produce a lot of this stuff on site. I think that's one of the big selling points for them. But then all of that innovation still becomes a sale later down the line. Yeah. And I think that there are two companies. One is called Hysata and one is called Spark Hydrogen. Now, I believe that FFI have investments in them. I'm not exactly sure what the connection is. But Hysata's looking at basically the same thing, which is more efficient electrolysis. I think it's like a 20% gain on efficiency, which is actually an enormous amount. And they do that with a really clever way of basically eliminating bubbles that happen in the water when you're electrolyzing it, which reduces contact and causes inefficiency. And they're able to do that by like passing it through almost like a form of like foam between a cathode and anode. That's pretty interesting stuff, but it goes a lot deeper. And then Spark Hydrogen does something called PWS, which has been around for ages, but it's never been able to be done very efficiently, which is photocatalytic water splitting, which is basically you use like a bunch of sunlight and you can also split the atoms. Not the atoms, split the molecules. Yeah, which is really cool as well. But both of these would be big plays for them because of the amount of green hydrogen that they plan to produce. So when you're talking these massive quantities, any increase in efficiency is enormous. So one, it's really cool, but it actually makes a lot of sense from the business perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. What's interesting and what's sort of stuck out to me in all this, like reading and research and stuff like that, it's like it's not often that you see, and obviously we have to wait and see if it actually plays out, it's profitable and it works. But it's not often you see like a big mining company that's renowned for its crazy amount of dividends that it pumps out. So obviously it's just like a darling to income wanting investors, to then go into pretty much it's almost like a well-funded startup, really, because it's developing all these different solutions. A couple of other things they've done is set up Fortescue Capital, which is a green energy investment accelerator in New York, which is there to help attract capital to co-fund some of these innovations that they're into, but also set up vehicles to invest in other promising green energy initiatives. So they've really gotten into that innovation side of things. And then another one that they announced recently was a US Advanced Manufacturing Center in Michigan, which is basically supposed to be a hub for production, like Fortescue's production of heavy industry batteries. So batteries that will go into their big mining trucks and stuff like that. Hydrogen generators or electrolyzers, and then even fast chargers for the battery fleet they're making. So it's sort of like full scale up and downstream getting into that innovation stuff. So it's big. We don't know if it's going to work, I suppose, but did you have any sort of closing thoughts on it all?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I'll ask you one more thing, which is, I guess we've talked about it being like a hard problem. Yeah. So I guess what do you see is kind of the biggest challenges in this whole thing? Because it's going to be obviously, it doesn't get labeled that because it's easy. So what's going on there? Yeah.
Well, I was actually going to say like this is sort of my wrap up as part of it, but I think obviously there's enormous challenges. Like the challenges are highlighted by the fact that nobody else is doing all of this, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of other innovations in parts of it, so like in terms of hydrogen or shipping, decarbonizing shipping and stuff like that. But this is like a whole of industry massive attack on the hard problems of decarbonizing, like heavy industry, shipping, steel production, all of that. So I think that the challenge is going to be getting it right and doing it all commercially sound. And to be honest, I think everyone would be sort of fairly skeptic of all of it working out, because at the end of the day, they're pushing it, they're pioneering it, they're throwing billions of dollars, $6.2 billion to decarbonize profitably. So and the thing is, a lot of it's unproven. We said that there's not that many economies of scale because all of this stuff is so big and there's fewer units in the world. I think it's summed up. There's a lot of challenges. It probably summed up is like getting the priorities right and in which ones they do first, sort of thing, and then also just like expecting that things will blow out in cost and time, and some innovations just won't work because they're investing in a lot. But I think it's admirable that they're having a red hot crack at it, and I mean, for somebody that's keen on helping the world decarbonize sensibly, I'm all for it. So a lot of challenges to get it done commercially sound and actually just sustainably, but I wish them the best of luck, to be honest.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right there. I think everyone's cheering them on, but no one really thinks that they'll be able to pull it all off. And I think the reason is, I think you can clearly see that in that no one else is doing this. Like no one else is trying to do the same thing. And you could look at that as being a bit concerning, or you could say, well, maybe they'll just reduce the scope a bit of what they're trying to do later down the line once they find some things. But also, I think it could be a bit of a compound effect where they solve some of the problems and then they go, oh, okay, well then the rest of this is definitely solvable. And, for example, even if you just replaced all of the trucks and you're able to then, manufacture those and sell those or whatever it is, now the idea of FFI and decarbonization is actually fueling itself with profits. So I think it could be a snowball effect. I mean, we'll see. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're wanting, and no, they're going out to be the pioneers. That they're going out to take the biggest risk, which they definitely are. You got to give kudos to them to that. It's bold, but like you say, if they get some of it to work, and it can stand on its 2 feet, and hopefully it does, because they do have FMG, which is a massive profit producer, funding them. Should work, but it's interesting to see how long the shareholders will stay on for the ride, because I suppose they are putting money into this very risky project, but it's noble, so see how it goes.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for chatting.
Mate, lots of fun as always. Loved it. Loved talking about decarbonisation and industry doing things. Thanks for listening. Find us at curiositycrisis.com and Curiosity Crisis on Instagram. We're on all the major streaming services, so you can listen how you like. We're also on Instagram and LinkedIn. So just asking a favour, if you got anything out of this episode, please send it to a friend. Your recommendation is definitely worth a lot. So thank you, Lukey. I'll catch you next time.
Anytime.